The coffee had gone cold in my mug, but I kept my hands wrapped around the ceramic anyway. It was one of those mornings where the silence felt too heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Through the kitchen window, I could see the oak tree Caroline and I had planted 32 years ago, its branches stretching toward a sky that couldn't decide between gray and blue. The house smelled like sawdust and memory. I'd spent the morning in the garage sanding down a chair leg that didn't really need it just to keep my hands busy. The workshop was the same one where I'd taught David to use a lathe when he was 12. His fingerprints were probably still on some of the tools, microscopic evidence of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else's son. Caroline's photograph watched me from the mantel, that smile she wore on our 30th anniversary, standing right here in this living room, her hand resting on the back of the couch we'd picked out together in 1987. She'd insisted on the floral pattern. "It'll grow on you, Richard," she'd said. She was right. Most things she said turned out to be right, even when I couldn't see it at the time. The house had been quiet for 3 years now, ever since the cancer took her. Not the comfortable quiet of a lazy Sunday morning, but the hollow kind that makes every footstep sound like an intrusion. I'd grown accustomed to eating dinner at 5:30, watching the news at 6 Oro, and being in bed by 9 Zoraro. Routine was the scaffolding that kept the days from collapsing into each other. David used to call every Sunday. Then it became every other Sunday. Then once a month. The last conversation we'd had was 6 weeks ago. Something about being busy with work, Madison needing help with her mother, the usual excuses that adult children make when they're too polite to say they've moved on with their lives. I walked through the house, my fingers trailing along the banister I'd refinished 2 summers ago. Every room held a piece of Caroline. The kitchen where she'd perfected her pot roast recipe. The sunroom where she'd read mystery novels with a cup of tea balanced on the armrest. The bedroom where her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, because I couldn't bring myself to move them. The doorbell rang at 10:47. I remember checking the clock above the stove, wondering who would visit on a Thursday morning. Through the frosted glass, I could make out multiple figures. Taller than the usual delivery man, more purposeful than the occasional door-to-door salesman, who still thought this neighborhood was worth the effort. David stood on my porch, but he wasn't alone. Madison was there, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe style she favored wearing, what Caroline would have called her lady lawyer outfit, all sharp lines and expensive fabric. Behind them stood Gerald and Patricia Monroe, Madison's parents looking like they'd just stepped out of a country club catalog. "Dad," David said, and something in his voice made my stomach clench. Not the warmth I remembered from childhood phone calls, but something rehearsed like he'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror. "This is unexpected." I managed stepping back to let them in. The house suddenly felt smaller, invaded by these 4 people who moved through it with a proprietary air that set my teeth on edge. Patricia's eyes swept across the living room with the calculating gaze of someone appraising real estate. Gerald's hand rested on Madison's shoulder in a gesture that seemed more possessive than supportive. David wouldn't meet my eyes directly, his gaze sliding past me to focus on points just beyond my shoulder. "We need to talk, Dad," David said, and Madison's hand found his elbow, a gentle pressure that I recognized as control masquerading as support. They settled into my living room like they owned it. Patricia took Caroline's chair without asking, her fingers drumming on the armrest where my wife's hands had rested for 30 years. Gerald stood by the fireplace examining the photographs there with the casual interest of someone touring a museum. Madison perched on the edge of the couch, her posture perfect, her smile fixed. David pulled a folder from his briefcase. Expensive leather, the kind Madison had probably bought him for Christmas. "We've been thinking about your situation here, Dad. This big house all by yourself. It's not practical." The word practical landed like a stone in still water. I could feel the ripples spreading, disturbing everything beneath the surface. "Your father and I have some concerns," Gerald interjected, his voice carrying that particular brand of authority that men like him cultivated in boardrooms and golf courses. "At your age, living alone in a property this size—" "I'm 71, I said quietly. "Not 90. Madison's smile tightened. "Of course, Richard. We're not suggesting you're incapable. We're thinking about your future, about what's best for everyone." Everyone. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. David opened the folder, and I caught a glimpse of papers. Official-looking documents with highlighted sections and sticky tabs marking important passages. We've found a really nice assisted living facility in Clearwater. Beautiful views, activities, people your own age. I didn't say anything. Couldn't really. The words were stuck somewhere between my brain and my mouth, tangled up with the realization that my son, my only child, was trying to put me away like an old piece of furniture that didn't match the new decor. The house could be sold, Patricia said, her tone suggesting this was a foregone conclusion rather than a suggestion. The market's good right now. You'd have plenty of money for your care, and David and Madison could use the proceeds to what? I found my voice, finally. It sounded strange in my own ears, harder than I'd intended, sharp enough to cut through the careful politeness they had wrapped around this ambush. To secure their future, Gerald finished smoothly. Your grandson's education fund, a better home for a growing family. Grandson? I didn't have a grandson. Madison wasn't pregnant, hadn't mentioned any plans for children in the sporadic conversations we'd had over the years. This was leverage pure and simple, dangling the promise of grandchildren like a carrot in front of a horse they were trying to lead to slaughter. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the movement in that familiar way that reminded me I wasn't young anymore, but I wasn't broken either. I think you should leave. Dad, be reasonable. David started, but I held up my hand. I built this house with your mother. Every nail, every board, every decision was ours together. And you come here into our home, into the space where she spent her last coherent moments, and tell me to sell it so you can... I stopped, the anger threatening to spill over into something I'd regret. Madison stood, her face flushed. We're trying to help you, Richard. Why are you being so stubborn? Because I'm not ready to be put out to pasture while vultures circle my property. The silence that followed was arctic. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed. Gerald's face reddened. David looked at his shoes, and for just a moment I saw shame flicker across his features, before Madison's hand on his arm seemed to steel his resolve. They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a quiet click that seemed to echo through the empty house. I stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by 32 years of memories, and felt something shift inside me. Not breaking, but hardening into a determination I hadn't felt since Caroline's diagnosis. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, turning on lights in every room, needing to see the space that was mine, that Caroline and I had made together. In the spare bedroom, I found the box of David's childhood things. Baseball gloves, school photos, a Father's Day card written in crayon, to the best dad in the world. The boy who wrote that card was gone. In his place was a man I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing my son's face, speaking with Madison's words, looking at me with Gerald's calculating eyes. I returned to the living room and sat in my chair, not Caroline's but mine, worn into the shape of my body over decades of evening news and Sunday football. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, and I made a decision. They wanted the house. They wanted my life packaged up and sold off like items at an estate sale. But they'd forgotten one thing: I was still here, still capable, still the man who'd built this house board by board, who'd raised a son, who'd loved a woman through 30 years of marriage and 3 years of grief. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marcus Webb, the lawyer who'd handled Caroline's estate. It was late, but I left a message anyway, my voice steady despite the hour and the emotion churning in my chest. Marcus, it's Richard Dalton. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's about my will, and about making sure certain people don't get what they think they're entitled to. I hung up and sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of the house around me. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. But tonight, I let myself remember Caroline's laughter in the kitchen, David's first steps across this very floor, Sunday dinners that smelled like pot roast and possibility. The coffee mug sat empty on the side table, and outside the oak tree swayed in a wind I couldn't feel from inside these walls. But I felt it anyway. Change-coming decisions made a line drawn in the sand of my own living room floor. They thought I was weak, defeated, ready to roll over, and let them have everything Caroline and I had built. They were about to learn that a man doesn't reach 71 by being easy to push around, and that sometimes the quietest people have the sharpest teeth when backed into a corner. The house held its breath around me, waiting, and I sat in the darkness planning my next move, feeling more alive than I had in 3 years. Part 2. 950 words. Sleep came in fragments that night, scattered pieces of rest between long stretches of staring at the ceiling. The bedroom felt different now, not the sanctuary it had been, but a battlefield, where I was gathering my thoughts for a war I hadn't chosen, but wouldn't retreat from. At 5:47 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed in the pre-dawn darkness, filling the kitchen with a smell that had once meant Caroline padding in with sleep-mussed hair and that soft smile she saved for early mornings. Now, it just meant another day to navigate alone. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and Caroline's old address book, the physical kind with actual pages and handwritten entries. Her careful script filled each line, neighbors, friends, family. I flipped to the W section and found Marcus Webb's number, written in blue ink with Caroline's lawyer, kind man, noted beside it. The lake house deed was in the safe. I knew because I'd put it there myself, 6 months after Caroline passed along with her jewelry, our marriage certificate, and the original photos from our wedding day. The safe was hidden behind a false panel in the garage workshop. Caroline's idea, actually. She had always been more practical about security than I had. But something nagged at me as I sipped my coffee. That folder David had carried yesterday. Those weren't just brochures for assisted living facilities. There had been legal documents, highlighted sections, places marked for signatures. They'd come prepared for more than just a conversation about my situation. I set down the coffee and walked to the garage. The morning light was just starting to filter through the high windows, catching dust motes in the air that smelled of motor oil and wood shavings. My workshop was exactly as I'd left it. Tools hung on their designated hooks, the half-finished rocking chair for a hypothetical grandchild covered with a drop cloth. The safe was behind the pegboard, holding my hammers and wrenches. I pulled the board aside. It swung on hidden hinges Caroline had insisted we install, properly Richard, not with that duct tape nonsense. And my stomach dropped. The safe door was slightly ajar. Not much, maybe a quarter inch, but enough to know it hadn't been properly closed. I always spun the dial after locking it. Caroline had drilled that habit into me after I'd once left it open overnight. My hands shook as I pulled the door fully open. The deed was still there, thank God, but the envelope felt lighter. I pulled out the papers and found my life insurance policy. Caroline's beneficiary designation, crossed out and replaced with Madison's name in handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. The change of beneficiary form stapled to it bore yesterday's date and a signature that was a crude forgery of my own. They'd been in my house, not just yesterday for their little intervention, but before. How many times? When I thought back over the past weeks, David had visited twice in the last month. Unusual for him, but I'd been pleased by the attention. Once he'd said he needed to use the bathroom. The other time he'd asked to grab a glass of water. Both times I'd been in the living room, and the garage was just through the kitchen. Madison's father, Gerald, was a locksmith before he retired. I remembered that from their wedding. David had made some joke about never getting locked out of his own house with Gerald and the family. I sat on my workshop stool, the insurance papers trembling in my hands. They hadn't just come yesterday to convince me to leave my home. They'd been laying groundwork, changing documents, creating a paper trail that would make it look like I'd agreed to everything. The phone call to Marcus couldn't wait until office hours. I dialed his cell, and he answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Richard, it's 6 a.m. They forged my signature, Marcus, on my insurance policy. Changed the beneficiary to my daughter-in-law." The line went quiet except for rustling. Marcus getting out of bed, I imagined already shifting into lawyer mode. "Tell me everything." I did, starting with yesterday's ambush and ending with the safe that hadn't been properly closed. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when I finished, his breath came out in a long, controlled exhale. "Richard, this is serious. Document fraud, potentially elder abuse. Did you give them keys to your house?" "David has a key, from years ago when Caroline was sick and we thought we might need him to check on us. Change your locks, today, and don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything, don't let them back in your house without a witness present." After hanging up with Marcus, I sat in the workshop as the sun climbed higher, painting the walls with light that seemed too cheerful for the ugliness I'd uncovered. The rocking chair caught my eye. I'd started it when David first mentioned he and Madison were thinking about kids someday. 3 years of somedays, and all I had was a half-finished chair and a daughter-in-law who'd tried to steal my life insurance. I returned to the kitchen and made a list on the back of an envelope, Old school, but my handwriting, my thoughts something they couldn't alter. 1. Change locks. 2. Review all documents and safe. 3. Security cameras. 4. New will. Exclude David entirely. 5. Who else has been in the house? That last question bothered me most. I thought about the neighbors, how Mrs. Chen had mentioned seeing an unfamiliar car in my driveway 2 weeks ago when I was at the grocery store. At the time, I dismissed it. Probably someone turning around using the driveway to reverse direction. Now, every unexplained detail felt sinister. The house phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as Madison's voice filled the kitchen, sweet as poisoned honey. "Richard, we're concerned about your reaction yesterday. David's quite upset. We only want what's best for you. Please call us back so we can discuss this like adults." Adults. As if I were the child throwing a tantrum, not the man who discovered their scheme. I deleted the message and pulled up my bank app on my phone. The accounts looked normal. No unexpected withdrawals, no new authorized users. But Caroline had taught me to be thorough. I logged into the county assessor's website and pulled up my property records. My heart nearly stopped. There, filed 3 weeks ago, was a quitclaim deed, supposedly signed by me, transferring half ownership of the house to David Dalton. The notary's signature was from a woman I'd never heard of, working out of an office in the next county. They were trying to take everything. Not quickly, not obviously, but piece by piece, document by document, creating a legal reality where I'd voluntarily given away my life. I screenshot everything, emailed it to Marcus, then to myself, on 3 different email accounts. Caroline had helped me set up for various purposes. Belt and suspenders, she used to say. Always have a backup. The morning stretched into afternoon. I called a locksmith. Not one Gerald might know, but a company 2 towns over that had good online reviews. The young man who arrived looked confused when I insisted on changing not just the front and back door locks, but the garage door locks, the workshop window locks, even the latch on the garden shed. "Someone you worried about?" he asked, installing the 5th deadbolt. "Someone I'm protecting against," I replied. While he worked, I went through every drawer, every file cabinet, every box in the garage. The wedding photos I found brought tears. Caroline in her mother's dress, me in a rented tux that was too tight in the shoulders, both of us so young and stupid and happy. David as a baby. David's first day of school, David graduating college. When had we lost each other? When had my son become someone who could look me in the eye and lie? The locksmith finished at 3:00 p.m. I paid cash, didn't want any electronic trail of paranoia they could use against me, and stood in my re-secured house testing each new lock, feeling the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place. Marcus called at 4:30. "I've got a court date for an emergency hearing on the quitclaim deed. Judge Thornton is an old friend. He's not happy about potential elder fraud in his county. We'll get this sorted, Richard, but you need to be prepared for this to get ugly." "It's already ugly, Marcus. I'm just catching up to the reality." That evening, I made Caroline's pot roast recipe. Not because I was hungry, but because the familiar routine of cutting vegetables, seasoning meat, and setting the table felt like armor against the chaos threatening to swallow me whole. I set the table for one, but I put out Caroline's good china, the set she saved for special occasions. If protecting my home from my own son wasn't a special occasion, I didn't know what was. The pot roast smelled like Sunday dinners and laughter, like Caroline teasing me about adding too much garlic, like David asking for seconds and thirds. I ate alone at a table that used to seat 4, sometimes 6, when David brought friends home from college. After dinner, I washed the dishes by hand, dried them carefully, put them away in their designated spots. The routine was meditation, each movement a prayer to the life Caroline and I had built the home we'd made the sanctuary they were trying to steal. I sat in my chair, not Caroline's, never Caroline's that remained sacred, and looked around the living room. Every piece told a story. The bookshelf I'd built when David was 10 and discovered reading. The lamp we'd found at an antique store in Vermont during our anniversary trip. The rug Caroline had splurged on, saying every room deserved one beautiful thing. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Dad, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand." Out of hand. As if defending my home was the unreasonable response to their theft. I didn't reply. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him experience a fraction of the uncertainty he'd inflicted on me. Instead, I called Mrs. Chen next door. She answered with her usual cheer, and I asked if she still had a spare key to my house, the one Caroline had given her years ago, just in case. "Oh, Richard, I'm so sorry. David came by last week and said you'd asked him to collect all the spare keys. Said something about getting them all recayed. He seemed so responsible I didn't think to question it." My jaw clenched. "That's fine, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for telling me." "Is everything all right, dear?" "Everything's fine." I lied, just making sure I know where all the keys are. After hanging up, I added another item to my list: warn neighbors about David's lies. The house settled into its evening routine around me. The creak of cooling wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on lights, feeling the weight of 71 years pressing down on my shoulders. But underneath the weight, I felt something else stirring. Anger, yes, but also determination. They'd underestimated me. Thought because I was old, because I was grieving, because I was alone, I'd be easy to manipulate. They were about to learn that a man who'd built his house with his own hands knew exactly how to defend it. I pulled out my phone and started making notes. Not just about locks and lawyers, but about strategy. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. But I'd fight on my terms with my weapons using knowledge they didn't know I had. Caroline's voice whispered in my memory, "Richard, you've always been stubborn. Thank God." I smiled in the darkness. Stubborn didn't begin to cover what I was about to become. "Where are you watching this video from? Leave your location." The morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after sleepless nights spent making hard decisions. I'd dozed fitfully in Caroline's reading chair, unwilling to retreat to the bedroom, where vulnerability felt like an invitation. At 6:15 a.m., I was already showered, dressed in the navy suit Caroline had bought me for our 40th anniversary, and nursing my second cup of coffee when Marcus called. "Judge Thornton can see us at 10. Bring every document you have, Richard, every scrap of paper that proves this house is yours." I arrived at Marcus's office at 9:30, carrying a banker's box filled with 32 years of proof. The deed signed by me and Caroline in 1992, property tax receipts in my name, utility bills spanning 3 decades, photographs of us breaking ground, framing walls, painting rooms. I'd even brought the original blueprint, coffee stained and worn with Caroline's handwritten notes in the margins. Kitchen window faces, east for morning light. Marcus's secretary, a woman who'd known Caroline from their book club, touched my arm gently as I passed. "I'm so sorry about all this, Richard. Caroline would be furious." She was right. Caroline would have been incandescent with rage, that particular brand of fury she reserved for injustice and dishonesty. I could almost feel her standing beside me, steel in her spine, fire in her eyes. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old wood, like every municipal building I'd ever entered. Judge Thornton's chambers were lined with law books and photographs of what I assumed were his grandchildren. He was older than I expected, maybe 75, with white hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human weakness. "Mr. Dalton," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Marcus has briefed me on your situation. Show me what you've got." I spread the documents across his desk like a gambler revealing a winning hand. The original deed, the property records the photographs. When I got to the forged quitclaim deed and the insurance policy, his expression darkened. "This notary," he said, tapping the forged document. "Linda Prescott. Marcus, isn't she the one who got caught up in that mortgage fraud case last year?" "Same one," Marcus confirmed. "Currently on probation." Judge Thornton leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Dalton, do you have any explanation for why your son would do this?" I thought about the question carefully. His wife comes from money, Gerald Monroe. Her father always looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. I think they see the house as an asset to be liquidated and me as an obstacle that can be removed with the right combination of legal documents and guilt. And the assisted living facility they mentioned, Clearwater Gardens. I looked it up last night. It's not a bad place if you want to spend your final years playing bingo and eating pureed food while your family sells your life's work out from under you. The judge almost smiled. "I'm going to issue a temporary restraining order, preventing any further changes to property titles or financial documents in your name. I'm also ordering a full investigation into the notary and anyone else involved in these forgeries. Your son and his family will be notified that any contact with you must go through legal counsel." Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by a deeper sadness. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Mr. Dalton, Judge Thornton said as I stood to leave. "My wife passed 2 years ago. I know what it's like when grief makes you an easy target. Don't let them mistake your sorrow for weakness." Outside the courthouse, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "That's the first battle, Richard, but we need to think about the war." "What do you mean?" "They've shown their hand. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft. They're desperate, and desperate people don't stop just because a judge tells them to. You need to protect yourself beyond just legal documents." That afternoon, I drove to Security Solutions, a shop on the edge of town, recommended by Mrs. Chen's son. The owner, a former police officer named Tom, listened to my situation with a practiced ear that suggested he'd heard similar stories before. "You want cameras, definitely, motion sensors, maybe a panic button linked to local police. How tech-savvy are you?" "I can work a smartphone and send an email. Beyond that, you'll need to walk me through it." Tom smiled. "We'll keep it simple. Cameras that feed to an app on your phone. You'll be able to see who's at your door in your driveway anywhere on the property. Some clients like audio recording, too, especially when there's potential for harassment." "Audio," I said decisively. "I want to hear every word if they come back." The installation took 3 hours. Tom mounted cameras at every entrance positioned to capture faces and license plates. Motion sensors went on the garage, the workshop, even the garden shed. The panic button went in my bedroom disguised as a lamp base. "Test it once a week," Tom instructed. "And Mr. Dalton, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." After Tom left, I walked through my house, viewing it through the camera feeds on my phone. It felt invasive seeing my home through these electronic eyes, but also oddly comforting. No one would sneak in unobserved again. The house phone rang at 6:47 p.m. I let the machine pick up watching the camera feed of my front porch on my phone. No one there. The voice that filled my kitchen was Patricia Monroe's syrupy, sweet, and poisonous as antifreeze. "Richard, dear, we're all so worried about you. This lawyer business is completely unnecessary. We're family. Can't we work this out like adults? David is beside himself. He only wants what's best for you." I deleted the message and blocked the number. If they wanted to communicate, they could do it through Marcus. That evening, I finally ventured into the bedroom. Caroline's reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, next to a bookmark holding her place in a mystery novel she'd never finish. I picked up the glasses carefully, feeling the weight of them, remembering how she'd peer over the frames at me when I made a bad joke. "I'm fighting for us, Caroline," I whispered to the empty room, "for everything we built." The closet still held her clothes. I hadn't been able to part with them: her favorite cardigan, the dress she wore to David's wedding, the jeans with paint splatters from when we'd redone the bathroom. I pressed my face into the cardigan, but her scent had long since faded, replaced by the smell of cedar and thyme. In the back of the closet behind her shoes, I found something I'd forgotten: a shoebox labeled "David Keep Forever" in Caroline's handwriting. Inside were report cards, drawings, a Father's Day card made from construction paper with "World's Best Dad" written in crayon. There was also a letter sealed in an envelope with "For Richard, open if I'm gone, and David needs remembering" written on the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. Caroline's handwriting filled the page, written in the shaky script from her final months. "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, I'm gone and something has happened with David. I've seen the way Madison looks at our home, how her parents calculate the value of everything they touch. I've watched our boy change, seen him become someone I don't fully recognize. But remember this: the David who built birdhouses with you, who cried at the Lion King, who slept with his Little League trophy, that boy is still in there somewhere. This house, our home, it's worth fighting for. But don't let the fight destroy what's left of your heart. Protect what we built. But remember, you built it with love, not hate. If David comes back to you, let him. But only on your terms, only when he's earned it. I love you, Richard. Be strong, but not hard. Be smart, but not cruel. And remember, I'm always with you in every board you nailed, every wall you painted, every moment we shared in these rooms. Your Caroline." I sat on the edge of the bed, Caroline's letter clutched in my hands, and cried for the first time since her funeral. Not the silent tears of grief, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I'd kept locked tight for 3 years. When the crying finally stopped, I felt emptied out, but also somehow lighter. Caroline had known. She'd seen this coming and tried to prepare me for it. The letter was her final gift: permission to fight, but also a reminder of who I was, who we'd been together. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my wallet next to our wedding photo. Then I returned to the closet and pulled out Caroline's cardigan. I carried it to my chair in the living room, draped it over the back, and sat with my phone pulled up the security camera app. The cameras showed an empty driveway, a quiet street, a house settling into evening. But I wasn't watching for what was there. I was watching for what might come. At 9:23 p.m., headlights swept across my driveway. A car slowed but didn't stop David's BMW, unmistakable even in the darkness. The camera caught his face clearly through the windshield. Jaw-tight eyes fixed on my house. Madison sat beside him, talking animatedly, her hands gesturing. They circled the block twice before disappearing. I took screenshots of both passes, time-stamped and dated, and emailed them to Marcus with a simple note, "They're watching." His reply came within minutes. "And now we're watching them watch you. Keep recording everything." The night stretched long and quiet. I dozed in my chair, Caroline's cardigan, a familiar weight against my back, my phone on my lap, showing 4 camera feeds. Every car that passed made me alert. Every shadow had potential meaning. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. Motion detected at the garage. I pulled up the feed and saw a figure in dark clothes testing the new lock, trying a key that no longer worked. The person looked up, and the camera caught David's face in the motion, sensor light shock and anger clear in his expression as he realized the locks had been changed. He tried the key twice more, then pulled out his phone. Moments later, my phone, the house phone I'd silenced but not unplugged, showed a missed call from David's number. He stood in my driveway for a full minute, staring at the house where he'd grown up, where his mother had died, where his father now stood. Guard against him. Then he walked back to his car, parked a block away, and drove off. I saved the video, backed it up to 3 separate cloud accounts, and sent it to Marcus with a timestamp. The sky was beginning to lighten when I finally allowed myself to move from the chair. My back ached, my neck was stiff, but I felt something I hadn't felt in days, secure in my own home. I made coffee as the sun rose, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and amber. Through the window, I could see the oak tree strong and steady, just like Caroline had always said our love was. They had tried to take my home. They had forged documents, plotted and schemed, treated me like an obstacle to be removed. But I was still here, still standing still, fighting. And they were about to learn that a man protecting his home, his memories, his wife's legacy, his very identity was a far more formidable opponent than they'd ever imagined. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. But I'd won the first real battle, and that made all the difference. The restraining order arrived by courier at 8:47 a.m., an official-looking envelope that felt heavy with consequence. I read it twice, savoring each word that put legal distance between me and my son's schemes. David Madison and her parents were prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my property, from contacting me directly, and from attempting any further changes to documents bearing my name. Marcus called as I was finishing my second reading. "They've been served. David's lawyer, some kid fresh out of law school who probably owes Gerald a favor, is already calling it unnecessary and inflammatory. They're claiming this is all a misunderstanding that involved forgery and breaking into my garage at 3 a.m. That video is gold, Richard. I've forwarded it to the district attorney. They're very interested in prosecuting, especially given the notary's history." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen feeling the strange emptiness of victory. I'd protected my home, but the cost was the final severing of whatever thread still connected me to my son. Caroline's letter weighed in my wallet, her words about remembering the boy he'd been echoing in my mind. The doorbell rang at 10:15. The camera showed Mrs. Chen on my porch holding a covered dish. I opened the door to the smell of her famous chicken soup, the kind she'd brought when Caroline first got sick. "Richard, dear," she said, bustling past me into the kitchen. "I heard about the restraining order. The whole neighborhood is talking. That boy of yours should be ashamed." I accepted the soup, gratefully touched by the gesture, even as I winced at the thought of neighborhood gossip. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. You didn't have to—" "Nonsense. You need to keep your strength up. Fighting family is harder than fighting strangers." She paused, arranging the soup container just so on my counter. "My Henry and I, we had troubles with his brother once. Money troubles. It nearly destroyed us, but we stood firm. Sometimes you have to choose between peace and principle is the only thing that lets you sleep at night." After she left, I ate the soup standing at the counter, too restless to sit. The house felt different now, not violated anymore, but fortified. A castle under siege, perhaps, but one with strong walls and a determined defender. I spent the afternoon going through Caroline's papers, documents I'd been avoiding since her death. Her handwriting-covered notebooks, garden plans, recipe modifications, observations about the birds that visited our feeders. In the bottom drawer of her desk, I found a journal I'd never seen before, leather-bound with a small lock I easily picked with a paperclip. The entries were sporadic, dated across the last year of her life. Most were mundane observations, but one entry dated 3 months before she died stopped me cold. David came by today while Richard was at the hardware store. He asked about the house, specifically about ownership taxes value. Said he was just curious, but his curiosity felt predatory. Madison stayed in the car on her phone. She didn't even come in to say hello. I'm worried about what happens to Richard when I'm gone. David's not the boy we raised anymore. He's become someone who sees value instead of meaning price tags, instead of memories. I need to find a way to protect Richard to make sure our home, our life, doesn't become just another asset to be liquidated. My hands shook as I turned the page, but that was the last entry. 3 months later, Caroline was gone, and I'd been left to face David's schemes alone. Except she had tried to protect me. The letter in the closet was proof of that. She'd known, had seen what I'd been too blind or too trusting to notice. I photographed the journal entry and sent it to Marcus. Within an hour, he called back, his voice tight with controlled anger. This establishes premeditation, Richard. They've been planning this for over 3 years. The afternoon mail brought more surprises. Among the usual bills and catalogs was a handwritten letter addressed simply to Dad in David's distinctive scrawl. The postmark was from 2 days ago, before the restraining order. I opened it carefully using a letter opener Caroline had given me as a wedding gift. The single page inside was brief. Dad, I know you're angry, but you have to understand our position. The house is too much for you. Mom would want you somewhere safe, somewhere you'd be taken care of. The changes to the documents were meant to streamline things, to avoid complicated probate issues down the road. We're trying to help you even if you can't see it. This lawyer business is just making everything harder. Please, let's sit down and talk like family. We can work this out. David. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Mom would want, as if he had any idea what Caroline would want. Streamline things, as if fraud was just efficient planning. Talk like family, from the son who'd tried to steal my home and forge my signature. I filed the letter with the other evidence, adding it to the growing pile of David's deceptions. Then I did something I'd been avoiding since this all started. I called David's old college roommate Pete, who'd always stayed friendly with me, even after he and David drifted apart. "Mr. Dalton," Pete said warmly, "how are you holding up?" "I've been better. Pete, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When did David change? When did he become this?" Pete sighed, a long exhale that spoke volumes. "Honestly, it started in college, but it got worse after he met Madison. Her family. They're all about appearances, status, who is what. Gerald once told David that a man's worth is measured by his portfolio, not his principles. David, he bought into it. Started seeing everything as transactional. Even his relationship with me. I hate to say it, but yeah, last time we talked must have been 6 months ago. He mentioned the house. Said it was wasted real estate, that you were sitting on a gold mine. I told him that was his childhood home, that it meant something beyond market value. He just laughed and said, 'Sentiment doesn't pay dividends.' After we hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk, not bothering to turn on lights. The house grew dark around me, but I found comfort in the shadows. Somewhere in this darkness, Caroline's presence lingered in the walls we'd painted together, the floors we'd refinished, the memories embedded in every corner. My phone lit up with a security alert. The camera showed a car idling at the end of my driveway, just beyond the property line, technically not violating the restraining order, but clearly testing its boundaries. I couldn't see who was inside, but I didn't need to. The message was clear. They were still watching, still waiting, still planning. I pulled up the security app and started a recording documenting their surveillance. Then I called the non-emergency police line. "This is Richard Dalton on Oak Street. I have a restraining order against my son and his family, and there's a vehicle matching his car idling near my property. Could you send someone to check it out?" The patrol car arrived within 10 minutes. I watched through the camera as the officer approached the vehicle, spoke to the driver, then gestured for them to move along. The car, David's BMW, drove away slowly, deliberately, as if leaving was their choice rather than a requirement. The officer knocked on my door, a young woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Mr. Dalton, I'm Officer Rodriguez. The vehicle has left the area. I've documented the incident and logged it as a potential restraining order violation. The occupants claimed they were just driving through the neighborhood, but I've made it clear that any further contact or proximity will result in arrest." "Thank you, officer." "Sir, if I may, I've handled a lot of these cases. Family disputes over property elder abuse situations. You're doing the right thing by standing your ground. Don't let them make you doubt that." After she left, I made myself dinner, nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it at the kitchen table where Caroline and I had shared thousands of meals. The silence was different now, not empty but full of determination. I wasn't just protecting a house. I was honoring a life, a marriage, a promise made to a woman who'd trusted me to preserve what we'd built together. At 9 p.m., I went through my nightly routine, checking locks, reviewing camera feeds, setting the security system. But I added a new step. I took out Caroline's journal and read the entry about David's predatory curiosity. Again reminding myself that this wasn't sudden, wasn't my fault, wasn't something I could have prevented. The bedroom felt less lonely with Caroline's cardigan draped over the chair. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding her reading glasses, and spoke to the silence. "I'm fighting for us, Caroline. Just like you asked. They won't take what we built. I promise you that." Sleep came easier that night, though. My phone stayed on the nightstand camera feeds, ready to alert me to any intrusion. I dreamed of Caroline, of us young and strong, building this house board by board, nail by nail, making something that would last. In the dream, she smiled at me and said, "You always were stubborn, Richard. Thank God for that." I woke at 6 a.m. to find a new email from Marcus. "Meeting with DA tomorrow at 2 p.m. They want to pursue criminal charges. This could mean jail time for David." Are you prepared for that? Was I prepared to see my son go to prison? The question sat heavy in my chest as I made coffee and watched the sunrise paint my kitchen gold. The boy who'd built birdhouses with me, who'd cried at children's movies, who'd once told me I was his hero. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw his father as an obstacle, a resource to be exploited. But Caroline's words echoed in my mind. Be strong, but not hard. Be smart, but not cruel. I replied to Marcus, let's hear what the DA has to say. Justice doesn't have to mean vengeance. The morning stretched ahead full of possibility and peril. I'd fortified my home, established legal boundaries, gathered evidence of their deception. But the war wasn't over. It was entering a new phase one, where the weapons would be laws and lawyers, evidence and testimony. I poured my coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the oak tree Caroline and I had planted, at the garden she'd designed, at the life we'd cultivated together. This was worth fighting for. This was worth every difficult decision ahead. And if David faced consequences for his actions, well, that was the price of choosing greed over family manipulation, over love, schemes, over honest conversation. The house settled around me with its morning sounds, and I settled into my resolve. Let them watch from their cars, let them plot with their lawyers, let them test every boundary I'd established. I was ready for whatever came next, because I wasn't just fighting for property or principle anymore. I was fighting for Caroline's memory, for the integrity of a life lived honestly, for the simple truth that some things love. Loyalty legacy couldn't be bought, sold, or stolen. They'd started this war. But I was going to finish it. The district attorney's office occupied the third floor of the county courthouse, a maze of cubicles and file boxes that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Marcus and I sat in a waiting room, with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines, neither of us pretending to read. At 2:15 p.m., a woman emerged from one of the office's early 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. Mr. Dalton, I'm Assistant District Attorney Catherine Mills. Please come in. Her office was small, but organized walls lined with law books and commendations. She gestured to two chairs across from her desk, and I noticed the file already open before her, thick with documents tagged with sticky notes. Mr. Dalton, I've reviewed the evidence your attorney provided. The forged quitclaim deed, the insurance policy changes the video of your son attempting unauthorized entry. This is a clear case of elder financial abuse and document fraud. She paused, studying my face. The question is, how far do you want to take this? I thought of Caroline's letter, be strong but not hard, be smart but not cruel. I want my property protected. I want them to understand there are consequences. But I'm not looking for revenge. Catherine nodded, unsurprised. The charges we could pursue include forgery, attempted theft by deception, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Combined, we're looking at potential prison time, possibly 5 to 7 years. For your son, similar for anyone else involved. The number hit me like a physical blow. 7 years. David would be approaching 50 when he got out. Whatever relationship we'd had would be completely irrevocably destroyed. However, Catherine continued, there's another option. We could offer a plea deal, lesser charges, probation, restitution, and a permanent restraining order. Your son would have a criminal record but no jail time. The choice is yours. Marcus leaned forward. What about the notary? The one who witnessed the forged documents? Linda Prescott is already looking at charges from another case. Her cooperation in this one could help her, which means she might testify against whoever paid her to notarize fraudulent documents. I stared at the file on Catherine's desk, imagining all the evidence it contained, the proof of my son's betrayal documented and categorized, ready to be used against him. Can I think about it? Of course. But, Mr. Dalton, you should know if word gets out that we're considering charges, they might try to contact you to pressure you to drop the case. Any such contact would be witness tampering, which would only make things worse for them. As we left the courthouse, Marcus touched my elbow. Richard, this is your decision. But remember, regardless of what you choose about criminal charges, the civil case is clear. The house is yours, and no court in the country would take it from you now. I drove home through streets I'd known for decades, past the hardware store, where I'd bought materials for 1,000 projects, past the diner where Caroline and I had celebrated every anniversary, past the park, where I'd taught David to ride a bike. Everything felt familiar, yet foreign, like looking at my life through someone else's eyes. The security system's chirp greeted me as I entered through the garage. I'd grown accustomed to the sound, to the red lights blinking on the cameras, to the knowledge that every entrance and exit was documented. My home had become a fortress, and I was both jailer and prisoner. I made a sandwich I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table with Caroline's journal open before me. I reread her entries, searching for guidance she could no longer give directly. One passage caught my eye, dated 6 months before her death. Richard asked me today what I'd want him to do if someone tried to take advantage of him after I'm gone. I told him the truth, protect what matters, but don't let protection become prison. The house is important because of the life we lived in it, not because of the walls themselves. If holding on to bricks and mortar costs him his peace, his humanity, his ability to find joy, then the house has already been lost, no matter who owns the deed. My phone rang, startling me. Mrs. Chen's number. Richard, dear, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a woman here who says she needs to speak with you. She says she's David's wife, but she's alone and she looks like she's been crying. My jaw tightened. Tell her I can't see her. There's a restraining order. She knows. She says she's not here to cause trouble. She wants to leave something for you, a letter. Should I send her away? I hesitated. Madison alone and crying, wanting to leave a letter. It could be another manipulation, another scheme, but something in Mrs. Chen's voice suggested genuine distress. I'll be right there. I walked the 3 houses to Mrs. Chen's, my phone recording the entire journey just in case. Through her front window, I could see Madison sitting on the porch steps, her designer clothes looking rumpled, her makeup smeared with tears. She stood as I approached, but stayed on Mrs. Chen's property, technically not violating the restraining order. Up close, she looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, nothing like the polished woman who'd invaded my home a week ago. Richard, she said, her voice hoarse. I know I can't talk to you. I know about the order, but I needed you to know I didn't know, not all of it. I said nothing, just kept my phone camera pointed at her, documenting. Gerald, my father, he planned everything. The forged documents, the notary, even the timing of when we'd approach you about the assisted living facility. I thought we were just going to talk to you to present options. I didn't know about the forgeries until the restraining order came through, and I saw the evidence. She pulled an envelope from her purse, holding it out at arm's length. This is from me, not from David. I'm leaving him. I can't be married to someone who would do this to his own father. Mrs. Chen emerged from her house, took the envelope, and handed it to me without a word. I'm sorry, Madison whispered. I'm so sorry. Caroline deserved better. You deserve better. I just wanted you to know that some of us are still capable of shame." She walked to her car, not the Mercedes she usually drove, but a smaller sedan I didn't recognize, and drove away. I stood there holding the envelope, feeling the weight of it, wondering what new revelation it contained. Back in my house, I sat at the kitchen table and opened Madison's letter with hands that trembled slightly. "Richard, I'm writing this because I need you to understand the truth. My father, Gerald, has been planning to get your property for over 2 years. He lost most of his money in bad investments and has been living on credit and my money. When he learned about your house's value, he became obsessed with finding a way to acquire it. He researched elder fraud, found Linda Prescott through his old locksmith connections, and created an entire strategy. He pushed David to reconnect with you, to gain access to your home, to find where you kept important documents. He had copies of your keys made, practiced forging your signature, even researched which assisted living facilities would make the most convincing cover story. David resisted at first. I heard them arguing, David saying it was wrong that you were his father, but Gerald wore him down, convinced him it was for your own good, that you'd be happier somewhere with people your age. Eventually, David convinced himself it was true. I'm not excusing David's actions. He made his choices. But I thought you should know that this wasn't entirely his idea. My father manipulated both of us, and I was too blind to see it until too late. I've filed for divorce. I've also told the district attorney everything I know about Gerald's planning. He's going to be arrested for conspiracy and fraud. I know this doesn't change what happened to you, but I wanted you to know that justice will be served even if it destroys my own family in the process. Caroline was kind to me at the wedding, even though I could tell she had reservations about me marrying David. She told me to take care of her boy, but don't let him forget where he came from. I failed at both. I'm sorry, Madison. I read the letter 3 times, processing the information. Gerald Monroe, the silver-haired man who'd stood in my living room and looked at my home like it was already his, had orchestrated everything. David had been manipulated, yes, but he'd also chosen to go along with it, chosen convenience over conscience. The phone rang. Marcus's number. "Richard, we have a development. Madison Monroe just turned herself into the DA's office. She's providing evidence against her father and willing to testify about the entire scheme. They're preparing an arrest warrant for Gerald as we speak. I know, she just left a letter explaining everything. Richard, please tell me, you didn't... She left it with my neighbor. I never violated the restraining order." Marcus exhaled with relief. Good. This changes everything, though. With Madison's testimony, we have a complete picture of the conspiracy. The DA wants to know if you're willing to pursue full charges against Gerald. I thought about it, the man who'd looked at me with contempt, who'd planned my displacement like it was a business transaction, who'd corrupted my son with promises of easy money and justified theft. "Yes," I said firmly. "Gerald faces full charges, but, Marcus, I want to talk about David." "What about him?" "The plea deal. Catherine mentioned probation, restitution, permanent restraining order. I want that for David, not because I'm soft, but because Caroline would want me to remember that he's still my son, even if he's not the boy I raised." "You're sure?" I looked around my kitchen at Caroline's chair, at the photographs on the refrigerator, at the life we'd built together. "I'm sure. Destroy Gerald's plans, yes. Make him face consequences, absolutely. But David. I just want gone from my life. Prison would keep me tied to him for years. This way, he's out of my life, legally bound to stay away, and I can move forward. I'll call Catherine. This is very generous of you, Richard." "It's not generous, Marcus. It's practical, and it's what Caroline would want." After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on lights. The house felt different now, not under siege, but healing. The walls held their secrets, their memories, their proof that love could build something lasting, even when that love was tested by betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Rodriguez. "Mr. Dalton, Gerald Monroe was just arrested. Thought you'd want to know. You can rest easier tonight." I could rest easier. The mastermind was in custody. Madison was cooperating, and David would face consequences without destroying what little chance remained for some distant reconciliation. I pulled out my phone and composed a message to Catherine Mills. "I agree to the plea deal for David, full prosecution for Gerald. Let justice be smart, not just severe." Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went to the garage, pulled the dust cover off Caroline's old car. I couldn't bring myself to sell it and just sat in the driver's seat. Her scent still lingered faintly in the upholstery, mixed with the smell of her favorite vanilla air freshener. "I'm doing it your way, Caroline," I said to the empty car. "Strong but not hard, smart but not cruel. I'm protecting what we built, but I'm not letting it destroy me." The garage was quiet except for the tick of the car's cooling engine and the distant hum of the security system. I sat there until the motion sensor light clicked off, leaving me in comfortable darkness, and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just defending anymore. I was reclaiming. Not just the house, but my life, my peace, my ability to move forward without the weight of vengeance dragging me down. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more decisions, more steps in the journey from victim to survivor. But tonight I was simply a man sitting in his late wife's car, in his own garage, in his own home, safe, secure, and finally free from the fear that had gripped me since that terrible morning when my son had revealed his true intentions. The house creaked and settled around me, and I listened to its familiar voice, understanding that home wasn't just about ownership or occupation. It was about choosing every day to protect what mattered, while still leaving room for grace. I got out of the car, pulled the cover back over it, and walked into my house, my fortress, my sanctuary, my cathedral of memory and love. The cameras watched, the sensors waited, and I moved through rooms that knew me, that held me, that would continue to stand long after all of us were gone. This was victory not in crushing an enemy, but in refusing to let their actions crush me. And tomorrow I would begin the next chapter, not as a victim, not as a warrior, but simply as Richard Dalton, a man who'd loved well-built strong and learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over perfect justice. The arrest made the local news. I watched from my living room as Gerald Monroe was led from his home in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. The reporter's voice was professionally neutral. Gerald Monroe, 67, arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. I turned off the television and sat in the silence. There was no satisfaction in seeing him taken down, just a hollow sense of inevitability. The man had gambled with my life and lost. The next morning, Marcus called with updates. Gerald's lawyer tried to argue for bail, but given the flight risk and the severity of the charges, he was denied. Madison's testimony is damning. She had copies of emails where Gerald literally outlined his acquisition strategy for your property. And David, his lawyer, contacted us this morning. He wants to accept the plea deal. 3 years probation, full restitution for any costs you incurred, permanent restraining order, and a formal apology to be read in court. The word apology stuck in my throat. What could David possibly say that would mean anything now? When does this happen? Hearing is set for next Wednesday. Richard, you don't have to be there if you don't want to face him. I thought about that. Not attending would be easier, certainly. I could let the lawyers handle everything, maintain my distance, preserve the fortress I'd built around my grief and anger. But something in Caroline's letter nagged at me, the reminder to be strong, but not hard. "I'll be there," I said. I want to look him in the eye when he admits what he did. The days until the hearing crawled by. I filled them with small projects, fixing a loose board on the porch, organizing the garage, finally going through more of Caroline's things. In a box marked memories, I found photographs from David's childhood, that I'd forgotten him at 5, gap-toothed and proud, holding up a fish we'd caught together. At 10, covered in flour from helping Caroline bake Christmas cookies. At 16, awkward in his first suit for the school dance. Each photograph was a small knife wound, a reminder of the distance between that boy and the man who'd tried to steal my home. I spread them across the kitchen table, creating a timeline of transformation I couldn't quite comprehend. When had the bright-eyed child become the calculating adult? Where was the exact moment we'd lost each other? Mrs. Chen stopped by Tuesday evening with another casserole lasagna this time. "How are you holding up, dear?" "I'm managing," I said, which was becoming my standard response to everyone's concern. She set the lasagna down and took my hand in both of hers. "Richard, I know this is hard, but you should know the whole neighborhood is proud of you. Standing up for yourself, refusing to be pushed around. Henry says you're the bravest man on Oak Street." After she left, I sat with the lasagna and the photographs, wondering what bravery really meant. Was it brave to pursue justice, or Would it have been braver to simply let it all go? Caroline would have known. She always knew the difference between strength and stubbornness, between principle and pride. Wednesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of Indian summer day that felt like a gift from October. I dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn to meet with Judge Thornton armor against the ordeal ahead. The courthouse steps were bathed in golden light as Marcus and I climbed them together. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "you don't have to say anything. The plea deal is already arranged. This is just formality." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, intimate in a way that made the proceedings feel more personal than I wanted. I took my seat behind Marcus as people filed in, the court personnel, a few reporters, and then David with his lawyer. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered. His suit hung wrong on him, as if he'd lost weight. His hair needed cutting. But it was his eyes that shocked me. They were Caroline's eyes, the ones I'd loved for 47 years, now filled with something that looked like genuine remorse. He saw me, and flinched actually, flinched as if my presence caused him physical pain. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Thornton entered. He took his seat, arranged his papers, and looked over his reading glasses at the assembled parties. "We're here for the plea agreement in the matter of the state versus David Dalton. Mr. Dalton, please rise." David stood, his lawyer beside him. From behind, I could see his shoulders trembling slightly. "Mr. Dalton, you're here to enter a plea of guilty to charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted theft by deception. Do you understand these charges?" "Yes, Your Honor." David's voice cracked slightly. "And you understand the terms of the plea agreement: 3 years probation, full restitution, permanent restraining order, and a formal apology to the victim." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Thornton reviewed the documents before him, then looked up. "Mr. Dalton, this court finds your actions particularly egregious, given that the victim is your own father. Before I accept this plea, I want to hear from you directly. Why did you do this?" David's shoulders sagged. He turned slightly enough that I could see his profile jaw, clenched eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your Honor, I told myself it was for his own good, that he was too old to manage the property alone, that he'd be happier somewhere with care. But that was a lie. I wanted the money. My father-in-law convinced me it was easy, that it was even ethical that children inherit anyway, so why wait?" He took a shaky breath. "But the truth is, I was weak. I let greed override love. I let my father-in-law's manipulation excuse my own moral failure, and I destroyed the relationship with the only parent I have left." Judge Thornton's expression remained stern. "And your apology." David turned, then fully facing me for the first time. His eyes met mine, and I saw the boy from the photographs, vulnerable, lost, ashamed. "Dad," he said, and his voice broke completely. "I'm so sorry. I know that's inadequate. I know words can't fix what I did. You and Mom built that house together, filled it with love, and I tried to take it like it was just property to be liquidated. I betrayed everything you taught me about integrity, about family, about what really matters in life." Tears ran down his face, now unchecked. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that somewhere in all my stupidity and greed, I never stopped being your son. The boy who learned to fish on Clearview Lake, who helped you build that birdhouse that's probably still in the garage, he's still in here. He's just been buried under layers of poor choices and worse influences." He wiped his face roughly. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so desperately sorry. And I understand if you never want to see me again." The courtroom was silent. Judge Thornton looked at me. "Mr. Dalton, do you wish to speak?" I hadn't planned to, hadn't prepared any words. But I stood anyway, feeling the weight of 71 years pressing on my shoulders. "Your Honor, my wife Caroline died 3 years ago. In her final months, she wrote me a letter advice for how to handle our son if things went wrong. I pulled the letter from my pocket, worn now from repeated readings. She told me to be strong but not hard, to be smart but not cruel, to protect what we built but not to let the fight destroy what's left of my heart." I looked at David, at his tear-stained face, at the shame and remorse that seemed genuine, even if it came too late. "I accept the apology because that's what Caroline would want. But acceptance isn't reconciliation. My son, the one I raised, he died when he chose greed over integrity. The man standing there might someday find his way back to being that boy, but it won't be on my watch. The restraining order stands. The distance stands. Maybe someday, years from now, if he proves he's changed, but not today. David nodded, tears still flowing. I understand. Judge Thornton banged his gavel. The plea agreement is accepted. Mr. Dalton, you will serve 3 years probation, during which time you will have no contact with your father. You will pay full restitution within 60 days. You will undergo counseling. And you will live with the knowledge that you nearly destroyed a good man for the sake of money you didn't earn and didn't deserve. He paused. This court is adjourned. As people filed out, David turned to leave, then stopped. Without looking back at me, he said quietly, "The birdhouse is still there, Dad. I saw it when I was in the garage. You taught me to paint it blue because that's Mom's favorite color. It's faded now, but it's still blue." Then he was gone, led away by his lawyer, and I was left standing in the courtroom with Marcus's hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Richard?" I wasn't sure. My chest felt tight. My eyes burned, and something inside me felt both broken and strangely whole at the same time. "I need to go home," I said. The drive back to Oak Street passed in a blur. The house greeted me with its familiar chirp, its cameras documenting my return, its walls holding me safe. I went straight to the garage to the corner, where that old birdhouse hung on a nail I'd hammered in 20 years ago. David was right. It was still blue, though the paint had weathered to a pale ghost of its original color. I took it down carefully, feeling the weight of it, remembering small hands helping me sand the wood childish concentration as he painted careful strokes. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. For a long time, I just looked at it, this artifact of innocence, this reminder of who we'd been before everything went wrong. Then I did something I hadn't done since Caroline's funeral. I went to the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized decades ago, but hadn't used in months. "David's voicemail," the recording said. "Leave a message." I almost hung up, almost preserved the distance, maintained the fortress. But Caroline's letter was still in my pocket, her words still echoing in my mind. "David," I said, "it's Dad. I'm not ready to talk to you. Maybe I never will be. But I found the birdhouse. It's on my kitchen table now, and I'm looking at it while I leave this message. You were 7 when we built it. You insisted on blue paint because it was Mom's favorite color. You remember that?" I took a breath. "I remember everything, the good and the bad, the boy you were and the man you became. Today in court, I saw something, maybe remorse, maybe just regret. I don't know which, and it doesn't matter right now. What matters is this. The restraining order stands because I need to be safe. The distance stands because I need to heal. But someday, maybe years from now, if you prove you've changed, call me. Not for forgiveness, I don't know if I can give that. But maybe for coffee, maybe to talk about a blue birdhouse and what it meant." I hung up and sat with the birdhouse, running my fingers over the weathered paint, feeling the grain of wood beneath. Outside, the October sun was setting, painting my kitchen in shades of gold and amber that Caroline would have loved. This was what healing looked like, not forgetting, not forgiving too easily, but holding space for possibility while maintaining necessary boundaries. The house around me stood strong, its walls protecting me, but not imprisoning me. I picked up the birdhouse and carried it to the shelf in the living room, where Caroline's photograph smiled at me. I set it there, a reminder of innocence lost, but also of the truth that people could change, even if that change came too late for some relationships to be saved. "I'm trying, Caroline," I whispered to her photograph. "Strong but not hard, smart but not cruel, just like you asked." The house settled into evening around me, and for the first time in weeks I felt something close to peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of having honored both justice and mercy, of having protected myself, while still leaving the door open, just a crack for redemption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments to a life forever changed. But tonight, I was simply a man in his own home, safe behind walls he'd built with love, surrounded by memories that sustained him, and holding on to the possibility that even broken things could sometimes somehow find their way back to wholeness. The birdhouse sat on the shelf, faded, but enduring, a testament to what was and what might someday be again. 3 months passed like water finding its level, slowly, inevitably reshaping the landscape of my life. Winter settled over Oak Street with the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound, ice cracking on the eaves, the furnace cycling on the deliberate silence of a house that had learned to breathe without holding its breath. The security cameras remained, but I checked them less frequently now. The fortress had become simply a well-protected home. Gerald Monroe was awaiting trial held without bail after prosecutors discovered he'd been planning similar schemes against two other elderly widowers in neighboring counties. David was somewhere in the city living out his probation, forbidden by law from coming within 1,000 feet of me. I'd received the restitution check, $47,000, to cover legal fees, security system installation, and what the court called emotional damages. I hadn't cashed it yet. The check sat in Caroline's desk drawer next to her reading glasses and the letter she'd left me. Some days I thought I'd donate it to a charity that helped elder abuse victims. Other days I thought I'd use it to finally finish the back deck Caroline had always wanted. Most days, I just left it there, another artifact of a war I'd won but taken no joy in winning. Mrs. Chen still brought casseroles, though, less frequently now. Her husband Henry had taken to inviting me for Friday night poker with some other neighborhood men, a gesture of inclusion that I appreciated even when I declined. Some evenings I simply wasn't ready for company. Other evenings I surprised myself by going by, laughing at their jokes, by losing money on bad hands and not caring. The birdhouse remained on the shelf by Caroline's photograph. I'd thought about repainting it, returning it to its original vibrant blue, but decided against it. The fading paint was honest. It showed the passage of time, the weathering of good intentions, the way beautiful things could age into ghosts of themselves. On a Tuesday morning in January, as I was finishing breakfast, the doorbell rang. The security camera showed a young woman I didn't recognize, late 20s professional attire, carrying a leather portfolio. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain latched. "Mr. Dalton, I'm Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's niece. I'm a real estate attorney, and I have a proposition that might interest you." I almost laughed, another scheme involving my property. But something in her expression, earnest, slightly nervous, made me pause. "What kind of proposition? Could we talk inside? I promise this isn't what you're thinking." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She declined coffee instead, pulling documents from her portfolio with hands that trembled slightly. "Mr. Dalton, my aunt told me what happened with your son. I'm so sorry. But that's actually why I'm here. I represent a nonprofit organization called Home Heritage Foundation. We work with elderly homeowners who want to protect their properties while ensuring they can live in them for the rest of their lives. I'm not selling my house to a charity. That's not what I'm proposing." She spread papers across my kitchen table. "What we offer is a living trust arrangement. You transfer ownership to the foundation, but retain lifetime occupancy rights. You live here maintenance-free for as long as you want. When you pass, the home goes to the foundation, which preserves it as affordable housing for families in need." I studied the documents, then her face. "Why would I do this? Because it protects you from any future fraud attempts. The property can't be taken, sold, or altered without your written consent. Because it ensures the home you and your wife built serves a purpose beyond just sitting empty after you're gone. And because," she hesitated, "because my aunt says you're the kind of man who'd like knowing his house would continue sheltering families who need it." I thought about that. The house Caroline and I had built, filled with children's laughter again, with the sounds of family dinners and homework arguments and all the noise of life being lived. It was appealing in a way I hadn't expected. "I need to think about it." "Of course. Take all the time you need." After Sarah left, I sat with her proposal and my coffee, watching winter light filter through the kitchen blinds Caroline had chosen because they softened the morning sun. The house felt different somehow, not just a monument to the past, but something with potential for future purpose. I called Marcus, who reviewed the documents and pronounced them legitimate. "It's actually quite generous, Richard. You'd have complete control during your lifetime, and they'd handle all maintenance and repairs. Plus, it would make any future fraud attempts impossible. There'd be nothing to steal." That afternoon, I walked through every room of my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. The living room where Caroline had arranged furniture to encourage conversation. The kitchen where she'd perfected recipes through years of patient experimentation. The bedroom where we'd shared 30 years of whispered conversations and comfortable silences. The garage where I'd taught David to use tools that were now gathering dust. Every room held ghosts, but they weren't haunting me anymore. They were just memories taking up space that could eventually serve new purposes, create new memories for families who needed a safe place to build their lives. I found myself in the garage standing before the workbench where David and I had built that birdhouse. My tools hung on their pegboard hooks, organized by size and function, a system I'd maintained for decades. I picked up the hammer we'd used, feeling its familiar weight, remembering small hands struggling to hold it steady. "What should I do, Caroline?" I asked the silent space. "Keep holding on or let go?" No answer came, of course, but I thought about her letter about being strong but not hard, about protecting what mattered while still allowing room for grace. Maybe letting go wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the ultimate act of strength, choosing purpose over possession, legacy over ownership. On Friday, I attended the poker game at Henry Chen's house. 6 men, most around my age, gathered around a felt-top table with cheap beer and cheaper cigars. They welcomed me like I'd been coming for years, instead of just twice before. "Richard," Henry said, dealing cards with practiced efficiency. "Sarah told me she talked to you about the home heritage thing. She give you the full pitch." She did. "And I'm considering it." The other men exchanged glances. Bill Morrison, who lived 2 streets over, cleared his throat. "My daughter tried something similar with me last year. Wanted me to sell up and move to some retirement villa in Arizona. Said I was wasting space in my house. What did you do?" "Told her the space was mine to waste." He arranged his cards. "But Richard, your situation's different. Your son tried to steal from you. That changes things. Maybe having the property locked up tight gives you peace of mind. Or maybe," suggested Tom Patterson, "it's about making something good come out of something bad. Your house helping families who need it, that's a legacy worth leaving." We played cards and talked about everything except my decision. But their words stayed with me as I drove home, through empty winter streets, as I let myself into my secure house, as I sat in Caroline's chair and looked at the blue birdhouse on the shelf. That night, I dreamed of Caroline. Not the sick Caroline from the end, but the young woman who'd stood with me in an empty lot 33 years ago and said, "This is where we'll build our life." In the dream, she took my hand and led me through our house, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with people I didn't know. Children playing in the living room, a family sharing dinner at our table, laughter echoing through halls that had been silent too long. "See," she said in the dream, "it's still alive, still serving its purpose." I woke with tears on my face and clarity in my heart. Monday morning, I called Sarah Chen. "I want to do it, the trust arrangement, but I have conditions." "Of course. What are they?" "When I'm gone, the family who lives here needs to know its history. I want them to know that Caroline chose the paint colors, that she planned every garden bed, that we built it with our own hands and filled it with love. I want them to know what they're inheriting isn't just walls and floors. It's a home that was cherished." Sarah's voice was soft. "We can absolutely arrange that. We'll create a heritage book, photos, stories, the history of the house. It'll be passed to every family who lives here. And one more thing. There's a blue birdhouse in the living room. It stays with the house. It's part of the story. The birdhouse stays," she agreed. The paperwork took 3 weeks to finalize. Marcus reviewed every clause, ensuring my lifetime rights were ironclad, that I could live in the house until my death, that I maintained control over any changes or modifications. The foundation would handle maintenance, repairs, property taxes, all the burdens that came with home ownership. But the house remained mine to live in, to love, to fill with whatever final chapters I had left to write. On signing day, I brought the blue birdhouse with me to the foundation's office. Sarah looked puzzled as I set it on the conference table next to the documents. "I want this in the heritage book," I explained. "My son and I built it when he was 7. It represents what this house was always meant to be, a place where parents teach children, where families build things together, where love creates lasting memories." I signed the papers with a steady hand, and something inside me unclenched. The house was protected now not by cameras and locks alone, but by legal structures that made it impossible for anyone to take. More importantly, it had purpose again, not just as my sanctuary, but as a future home for families who needed what Caroline and I had created. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The winter sun was bright, painful in its clarity, and I realized I was smiling. The house greeted me with its familiar chirp as I entered. I moved through rooms that were still mine, but no longer just mine. They belonged to the future now, to children not yet born, to families not yet formed, to life continuing in cycles I wouldn't see, but could trust would happen. I picked up the phone and did something I hadn't planned, but suddenly knew was necessary. I called David's number. He answered on the third ring voice, wary. "Dad, I signed papers today. The house is in a trust. When I'm gone, it goes to a foundation that provides affordable housing for families. You won't inherit it, won't ever have claim to it." Silence. Then quietly, "I understand. I deserve that." "This isn't punishment, David. It's purpose. The house your mother and I built will keep being a home, keep sheltering families, keep serving the function we always intended. That matters more than any inheritance." "I'm glad," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Mom would love that." We hung up without saying goodbye, without promises we couldn't keep. But something had shifted, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. We were on different paths now, and perhaps that was how it needed to be. That evening I sat on my porch despite the cold, wrapped in Caroline's old cardigan that I'd finally allowed myself to wear. The oak tree stood bare against the winter sky, waiting for spring to bring it back to life. The house stood solid behind me, its future secure, its purpose renewed. Mrs. Chen came out of her house and waved. "Richard, come have dinner with us. Henry's making his famous chili." I stood feeling the weight of the cardigan, the cold air, the invitation to move forward. "I'd like that." As I walked toward warmth and friendship and the simple pleasure of sharing a meal, I looked back at my house one more time. It stood in the gathering dusk lights glowing in the windows, looking like what it had always been, a home, not a fortress anymore, not a battlefield, just a home waiting for its next chapter. Caroline would have approved, I approved, and that finally was enough. If you find the story interesting, comment number 1. If you find it sad, comment number 2.